Good afternoon, and thank you to the team at Maytree for inviting me. I'm always pleased to provide my help and support wherever I can. I know as not-for-profits that we're all focused on investing the maximum possible dollars, resources, time, energy that we have in fulfilling our missions. But we actually have the same challenges as other employers who have many more resources at their disposal in terms of being able to attract and retain top talent in our fields. So this place, this gap between needs and resources is a place where I spend a lot of my thinking time, and I suspect many of you do too, which is why you're here today. So I'm really happy to share whatever ideas I have with you, but I'm really looking forward to the opportunity for our discussion period later so that I can hear about some of the creative insights that you've actually had and some of the things that you've tried as well, so we can really share good ideas together. I will say from the outset, we did ask the question when you registered, how many people are in your organization, and I know many of you come from very small organizations. So by comparison, United Way, Toronto and York Region is a large employer in our sector, and so I know that we're pretty well resourced, maybe compared to many of you. But it is all relative. When I started my career in the corporate sector, there were many, many more resources at my disposal as well. So over time, I've really come to look at the bright side. I would say when there are not that many resources to spend, it forces us to really be strategic and wise in the kinds of investments we're going to make. And we try to pinpoint where we're going to actually get the greatest gain for the resources that we're going to invest. And I would also say that as a sector, we actually have an advantage over the corporate sector and others, which is really that people come and work in our organizations because they already care about the work that we do. They're already aligned with the missions that we are striving to realize. And that means that from an employee engagement standpoint, we start from a place that's much further ahead. So I would say, all the way through this discussion to not lose sight of that. It's a really precious resource not to squander, is that kind of, that commitment that people come to us with. When I arrived at United Way in 2005, we actually had very good HR systems in place. But the mandate at that time had been very transactional in nature, and we didn't really have a human capital plan at that time. But 6 years later, we were named as one of the Greater Toronto Region's top 100 employers, and we've been on that list for 5 years in a row now. And, to be fair, we definitely made investments along the way, but a lot of what we actually accomplished was focused effort and a real dedication to moving things forward. And I really believe that you can do a lot with a little. So, starting with my first idea then. That really is to start with a strong foundation. If you don't have a lot of resources at your disposal, this would be the place to start. So for those of you who are HR practitioners in the room, you know that all the HR literature out there will tell you that you should be striving to be a strategic partner with the business. And for those of you who are not HR practitioners, you know that people need to be at the starting point of all of your strategic planning, and that's absolutely true. However, I don't actually believe that anybody wants to hear about my labor market analysis or my ideas about engaging millennial employees if I can't get their paycheck right or if we don't know how to structure a legally defensible employment agreement. So I would say ask yourself some questions. Do we have good practices around paying people, around recruiting people, around promoting people, about fairness and equity? Do we actually have good policies in place, things that will mitigate risks, making sure that we are actually meeting our legislative requirements? When leaders and managers need advice, is there somebody that they can turn to, somebody available to them to help them through a difficult situation? If you have a union, do you actually have positive relationship? And are you actually working on building that relationship? So if you're not sure on any of these, I would say focus your efforts here first. And there is good news. These are skills that you can actually hire for if you've got the ability. And if not, these are skills that you can bring in through a consulting contract or even through a volunteer or through your board. But this is actually the this is the best foundation that you can actually lay to build the credibility with your staff and with the organization's leaders. And it kind of gives you that place to build. So having done that, if you feel like you've got those basics right and you want to start to build out a great HR program, where would you go next? So my second idea is really balance implementing best practice with being unique. Because on paper, I would say most employers are striving for similar things, right? So you've all heard about attract and retain and motivate your staff. We all want to engage people. We want to build leadership capability. We want to improve our diversity and inclusiveness, right? I'm going to take a stab at this because this would be sort of what I'm working towards, and I suspect some of you are too. I figured that you're interested in creating a vibrant workplace culture where everybody is learning, where everyone is aligned and working towards the organization's goals, where there's a sense of enthusiasm, where people feel recognized, where there's just this uncanny ability to understand what the organization's challenges are and to know how to meet them. Does that sound about reasonable to all of you? Is something that everybody's working towards? So if that's the case, then why would somebody work in your organization and not another one? So you need to think about, yes, you want all of these great practices, but what's unique about your organization? What really drives somebody to want to work towards your mission? What is interesting about your culture? What is it that people really take from their work experience? So what's your value proposition towards your employees? So you might think about, okay, well, what could that look like? It may be that your organization is a great training ground for people who are entering the sector. Or perhaps your organization is small enough that people get to work on multiple files at once. So there isn't really a sense of bureaucracy and hierarchy, and people get an opportunity to really work on lots of interesting projects. Or it could be that maybe in your organization, your staff have opportunities to get to know and to be known by people who are really important to them in your area of the sector, for example. So what are those things that actually make people feel enthusiastic about working for you? And it's not actually that difficult to find out, because you can actually just ask your staff, and there's lots of ways to do that, right? You can actually, you can do surveys. And there are surveys that are actually quite cost-effective if you go out and find them. And even things like tools like SurveyMonkey are free for 10 questions or less if you want to do some surveys, and then it'll aggregate the information for you, so people aren't necessarily feeling like they're putting themselves out there with their own personal information. You can bring in a volunteer to do focus groups. You should be doing exit interviews, and anybody leaves your organization, that's a really good source of information about what the experience is like working for you. And then you get a sense of what is it that makes people enthusiastic about where you work, and what are some of those things that you really need to think about fixing as well. And as you kind of build out that information, now you can say, okay, well, where are some quick wins? What are some of the things that we could actually do to show momentum that we've been listening, while you work longer term on some of the things, maybe like fixing your benefits plan or your pay structure or something that maybe will take a little bit longer. So you get a sense that there's actually an evolution towards something new that's coming. We actually at United Way have been doing an employee survey for well over a decade. We started in 2004, and we ask the same questions but every 2 years. And that really gives us an opportunity to see where is it that we're making progress. And we've used that survey to help us prioritize what are the things that we're going to work on. So organizationally, we pick maybe 2 to 3 topics that we're going to work on. And then because we're large enough, we're over 200 staff, departments actually get a chance to see their results as well. And then they talk locally about the things that are going on in their areas, and they pick 2 or 3 items. So by the time you've done that kind of discussion, and then you've done your planning, and then you think about implementing some change, it takes quite a while. But 2 years later, then we go back and we say, so how have things improved? And in almost all cases where we've actually focused our efforts, because it's actually helped us prioritize, we've actually been able to see some real movement. So asking your staff, I think, is a really, really good place to start, and then to figure out what are the things that are going to give you the biggest bang for your buck, or even no bucks, but energy. So now you've got your baseline, you've got good HR practices in place, and you've got the sense of momentum around where you're going to focus. How are you going to actually now work on that? My third idea is to really expand your organizational capability through others. So, I could have called this rely on the kindness of your friends, right? And in our sector, I think we tend to have a lot of friends. I would say across the board, whether that's sort of thinking big in terms of legal advice and support that you're going to need, some really important things like that about creating a compensation system, or even small things like, we're working on a recognition program or a new orientation program. What are some of the things that you're doing, that kind of thing? You can actually go out and ask for some support. We've actually found that when we go out and we ask for either free or discounted services, it's amazing how many people are willing to actually provide that. Even if you can't find free, discounts are actually pretty available. I know I've certainly called up providers before and said, is there a not-for-profit discount? And they'll say, oh, I don't know. I've never actually been asked that question before. But then they go away and they think about it, and they usually come back with a discounted rate for us. So don't be afraid to ask. Even for an organization like ours, relatively big, we certainly don't have people on staff with expertise in, in areas like pay equity programs or in terms of disability management or something like that. So if you'll call up a provider sometimes to say, I just really need an hour of your time, would you be willing to talk to me? A lot of times people are actually willing to help you out. So don't be afraid, I would say. You can also get creative around bringing other people into your organization in other ways. So you could ask a donor, for example, to fund a professional development opportunity. Or you can ask your staff, what expertise do you actually have? People bring all kinds of interesting skills to the workplace. Something that maybe you could actually put on as a workshop for our other employees. And then that's a great development opportunity for them to actually teach something. And then you could always invite another organization in to kind of come in and say, we've got 2 or 3 spots, and then maybe when you do something similar, could we actually get invited to your programs? So you try to trade off with each other. Even in your networks, we've actually found friendly yoga instructors who are willing to give our staff a discounted rate, and then we just give them a room at lunch. And it makes people happy to have that kind of service available. It doesn't actually cost us anything as a workplace, but it does actually bring a sense of, kind of community to our staff and an opportunity to sort of engage in wellness activities and that kind of thing. We've had professional development companies offer us pro bono support, that kind of thing. You can even walk down to your local gym and ask them if they've got a corporate rate. And most of the time, they will be happy to give a corporate rate to your employees, so you can just pass that discount on to them. So big and small, there's lots and lots of things that you can do. I would say you should also really look to get invited to free seminars, in addition to 5 good ideas, of course. But if you look around, legal firms, for example, will do usually 2 or 3, sometimes 4 seminars for their clients in the course of a year, and you could ask them if they could give you a spot. And then you kind of hear about what's new in employment law, for example, things like that. When we sign any kind of contract with a benefits provider, we usually ask them to include workshops either for our staff or for the HR staff who will be managing that. So you can kind of embed in the contracts that you've already got some opportunities for learning or for additional advice, that kind of thing. So get creative and brave, and I find that helps a lot. So let's talk about my 4th idea. You'll see it on your table there, which I've called deal with the tough stuff. So HR skills and HR programs are really important and helpful, but there are always the complexities of people issues. When you've got people in the mix, people do and say things. Each person who joins the organization makes a bit of a difference in terms of the tone. There's always going to be issues that you're going to want to deal with. Or maybe you won't want to deal with, but you should deal with, I should say. Again, you might need to bring in some help if you don't have the skills to do that, but so much of this is really based on the willingness to actually understand what your issues are and to actually work on them in a concerted way. So, for example, I know not true of any organization here, but we certainly know that there are organizations where there are, maybe dysfunctions at the leadership level, for example. There may be times where there's a behavior that's going on that is disrespectful or somehow not aligned with the values of your organization. If you don't actually address those things, your staff notice them anyway, and in fact, it actually takes away their sense of of engagement. You know, I talked about how people already arrive at our doors wanting to be engaged. You know, you don't want to squander that. It is so important. I would say that, you know, the flip side of people walking in the door engaged is that the disappointment level is higher if people don't actually find a good working experience where they really believe in the mission. And so that willingness to kind of step in and be a part of fixing whatever needs to be fixed, I would say, is really, really important for your organization. You know, I mentioned that we started doing this employee survey in 2004. And I would have to say, by and large, the results have actually been pretty positive. But I'd say maybe 6, 7 years ago, we had this feeling that there was something more to learn about the organization. And we brought in an external person who asked our staff in various ways. There were, you know, focus groups and surveys and that kind of thing. So, like, really, what should we be fixing? And we heard a lot back, actually, and some of it, I have to say, you know, having been on the leadership team at the time, was difficult to hear. But I would commend my colleagues for opening themselves up to hear some of that, and then that really pushed us to say, we're going to work on these things together, and we're going to really think about the culture of our organization and the care that that needs. And if you're to talk to many of our staff today, I think a lot of them would really describe how far we've come over that period of time, because there was that willingness to listen to what some of the issues were and to actually try to put not so much programs, but effort behind making improvements. As an HR person, I have to say what I really love about my work, and I guess it's probably true of many professions, is you don't actually ever get there, right? So we can design lots of orientation programs and professional development programs and payment programs and all of those kinds of things. But things change all the time, and you always have the complexities of people issues to deal with. So not only are the staff in the organization change, but our society changes, right? And what's acceptable in the workplace, certainly what was acceptable when I came to the workplace, in the early 90s, it's actually quite different from what would be acceptable in a workplace today. So we always have to be keeping up with this idea of where we want to be collectively and how we actually continue to provide the care and the feeding of our organizations that is going to need. That we need in order to move forward. And I think that when you actually have staff who can see that you're willing to put yourselves out there, it really builds a sense of trust and momentum, and that really goes an awful long way. So that brings me to my fifth idea, which is to really be in it for the long term. Because you can't do it all at once, right? You can't introduce a new orientation program and a recognition program and a new pay structure and a new professional development calendar all in 1 year, for example. People will become overwhelmed. There's only so much change that can be absorbed at once, right? So you have to find the right pace. And when it comes to issues of building trust, people need to see you actually living up to these new espoused values or whatever it is that you're going to be putting out there to say this is actually how we're going to handle things going forward. You need to actually prove it time and time again. So it really is a long-term proposition. I haven't talked that much about diversity and inclusion so far, but I think I would guess that most of us would actually recognize that bringing in diverse points of view and really creating an inclusive workplace is incredibly important for us to move forward in a productive way. And that really does take time. It takes time in terms of building out the profile of our staff team, but also working on the skills to actually include different points of view, right? So sometimes it's easier, I think, to just decide I'm just going to go it alone. I'm going to just figure out how to fix this, and I'm going to take it away and work out a new program, and then I'm going to implement it. But it definitely takes you a lot further if you actually bring in different points of view to say, how should we tackle this problem together? Or what, if we want to go to the next level, what should that actually look like? And that sense of inclusion, I think, is great. I'd also say that a lot of times we think about organizational culture as really stemming from the top leader. And I think that, again, there's a lot of truth to that. But every single person who comes into your organization, through their actions, makes a difference to the organizational culture, right? So if you can actually bring your team together to say, what is it that we want to create together? What should the experience of working here actually be? And then figure out how you're going to reinforce that. And then the things that are counter to that, how are you going to kind of let those kind of quietly go away, by not recognizing that kind of behavior, by speaking to people about things that, are not in keeping with your values, all of that kind of thing. Over time, you'll actually be able to figure out kind of a pace and a timing that works for you in terms of moving your organization forward as well. Tina is here today and was part of our diversity and inclusion team when she worked at United Way. We actually started a diversity and inclusion team in 2009. And every couple of years, we kind of refresh membership on that team. It's a group of volunteers from across the organization who come together to say, okay, so how are we going to think about what inclusion looks like in our organization? What are the issues of the day, and how are we going to engage the rest of our colleagues in a dialogue about what inclusion should be, and how do we build people's skills and those kinds of things. And there is no end in sight. It really is a long-term proposition. I don't think we'll ever sort of step back and put a tick mark next to, okay, we're now a diverse and inclusive organization, right? That's always going to take effort and time, and thinking about, what are the challenges that we're facing currently. So I would say, sort of, I guess in conclusion then, that effort, that long-term effort, is just as important, if not more, than dollars that you can spend. Looking to make genuine change, I would say, is more effective than being able to buy lots of HR programs off the shelf from a consultant. And if you do have those limited resources, you really are pushed to be thoughtful and wise in the decisions that you make. When I worked in the corporate sector early in my career, I actually had the great fortune to work for an employer where resources weren't that big of an issue, and we had lots of HR people, and they all had lots of really good ideas. But we found over time that it was hard to explain how, this month's recognition program actually meshed with last month's professional development program, and then the leadership skills that we were communicating the month before that. How did they all hang together? So, as a sector, we don't actually suffer from that flavor of the day, so always looking on the bright side. But not being able to indulge every good idea does actually lead us to be more strategic. So I'd really encourage you to think about your own organizations and what it will take to actually create a great HR program for you, where you are in terms of size and in terms of culture. And don't forget about the fact that we do really have the greatest asset of all, which really is the people who come and work for us. They already walk in the door wanting to bring their best every day, and it's really now our challenge to think about how to kind of create the conditions for them to thrive in all that they do. So those are my ideas to share with you. Thank you.